The cruiser lights cut through the cold Kansas night like two bright eyes. Men in police jackets moved quietly up the small driveway. They kept their voices low. The house looked normal. A tidy yard, a porch light, a wind chime that made soft sounds in the wind. But the man at the door did not come for a normal visit. Dennis Rader opened the door. He was calm. He smiled a small, polite smile and asked what was wrong. He had been a leader at his church. He had helped at the community center. He had gone to meetings and held a job in the city. He wore a suit sometimes and a tie, waved at neighbors, and drove a small sedan like many other men. The police showed him a badge and said they needed to talk. He did not run. He did not shout. He put his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked. For many people who had waited for decades, that click sounded like the end of a long, dark story. The headlines came the next day. The BTK killer, the man who called himself bind, torture, kill, had been arrested. People who had lived in fear for years felt a strange mix of relief and shock. How could a man who smiled at church and helped the Girl Scouts be the same man who had hurt so many people and shaken an entire town? That moment, Dennis Rader being taken from his front door, was the loudest part of the story. It was the peak. It was the moment when a secret life collided with the life everyone saw. But the worst part of the story was that he had kept doing his crimes while living a quiet life for a very long time. The arrest made people ask, how had they missed the signs? And how had he managed to keep his terrible secret hidden for so many years? After that loud first moment, the story moves back in time. We need to see how small steps and strange choices built the truth. We need to learn how the letters to the newspaper and the careful police work created a long path that finally led to the house at night. The rest of this chapter will tell the story that led to that door. Dennis was born in 1945 in Wichita, Kansas. As a boy, he liked fixing things and he liked rules. Some people say he was quiet as a child and liked to be alone. In school, he did chores and learned how things worked. When he grew up, he had a job working for the city. He also joined the church where he later became a leader. Many people trusted him. They saw a kind, helpful man. He coached youth, worked with community groups, and put a tidy mask on his life that fit in a small town. At the same time, behind that everyday life, terrible things were happening. Starting in the 1970s, women and families in Wichita found themselves in danger. The police called the unknown attacker the BTK killer because the letters they received from the criminal used the words bind, torture, kill. These letters were cruel taunts. The writer would tell the police and the newspapers about crimes and sometimes give details that only the killer would know. People who read those letters felt fear and anger. The police tried to stop him, but the killer did not stop for many years. The letters changed the way people felt safe. Mothers told their children not to walk alone at night. Shopkeepers looked out for new faces. The city felt watched. The police worked hard, but clues were few. The killer seemed careful. He did not leave much that could be tied back to a person. So the letters became one of the few pieces the police had. The letters also made the killer feel famous. He liked being in the papers and on the news. That made the case strange. Someone wanted attention for terrible acts. The BTK letters were also part of what made the case hard. The writer sometimes stopped for years and then started again. The gaps confused the investigators. Was it the same person? Was it a copycat? The police were patient and kept evidence from each event. They learned that small details can mean a lot. A fingerprint, a hair, a piece of paper. Anything could help if it was saved carefully. One day in 2000, the killer sent a floppy disk with a message. The disk seemed like a small, old thing from years before. Many people had moved on to newer technology, but the killer used what he could find. The disk was a mistake. The police found that the disk had been used on a computer that once belonged to a certain place. That place was a church. That church had a list of people who used the church computers. Those names gave the detectives a direction to look. The disk showed that the killer had not outsmarted technology. He had left a tiny trail. This piece of evidence, the disk, was a small thing that helped lead to a very big result. The detectives followed the records and matched the disk to the church network and to a person who had a certain kind of handwriting and certain words in his letters. They checked names on lists and compared the writing to the old letters. Then they found a match in a small way that mattered. The writing matched one man's way of using words and letters. The detectives kept the investigation quiet for a while. They watched, they checked things, and they waited for more proof. They did not want to mistake an innocent man for a terrible one. The police tested old evidence in new ways. Forensic science had grown much better since the 1970s. The police could now check tiny pieces of things and find matches. This is what they did. They compared old evidence from the crime scenes to new samples they could get. They looked closely for any link. A big change came from comparing DNA and from finding new pieces of evidence in the houses and garages of suspects. The police looked at small things no one else thought important. An old cable, a TV remote, the trash outside a house. Those small items sometimes held traces that could be matched. The detectives learned that time changes things, but also leaves small marks. The marks can be a way to tell a story. At the same time, Dennis kept living his double life. He went to meetings. He read the Bible in public. He drove his children to church events. He wore a smile at the grocery store. He even led the congregation. People who saw him on Sunday could not imagine the other life he had. That made the capture feel like a thunderbolt to his neighbors. People who had trusted him felt shocked and hurt. They asked how they had missed the truth. That question was loud in the town for a long time. Police work was not simple. It took many pieces and many people. Detectives made lists of times when letters were mailed, when calls were made, and when suspicious people were seen. They asked neighbors about work schedules, about when certain cars were driven, and about places people went. Neighbors sometimes thought small things were meaningless, but when you add many small things together, a picture appears. The detectives had long lists, and they compared them, looking for repeats. A long time before the arrest, the killer had sometimes been very bold. He sent letters to the newspapers and to the police, bragging about what he had done. He wanted to be noticed. Those letters made the case famous and made many people wonder if this man would be stopped. The police put out warnings and tried to be careful. They also warned citizens and asked people to share anything that seemed odd. As the detectives followed the breadcrumb trail the floppy disk had helped them find, they made a slow plan. They checked the man's records. They asked for permission to take a sample of DNA. The law says you usually cannot take DNA without cause, so the investigators waited for a moment when they could do it lawfully. When that moment came, they collected a small sample and compared it to DNA from the old crime scenes. The match came back. The DNA matched the samples from the old cases. That is a very sharp kind of proof. DNA is like a private code that belongs to each person. If it matches, the chance it is a mistake is tiny. The detectives had to be sure, so they tested more and more. Each test made the match stronger. The match pointed to a man who had many roles in the town. They had to move carefully and quickly. Before the police went to the house that cold night, they did one more thing. They searched for other proof. They looked into papers, into small files, and they watched quietly. They planned so that when they knocked on the door, there would be enough proof to hold up in court. This planning was careful because so many lives were waiting on the result. If the case was wrong, it would hurt innocent people. If the case was right, it would bring answers to families who had waited. When the officers knocked and Dennis answered, it felt like the end of the long hunt. But the story had one more loud moment before the chapter closed. During the search of his house, the officers found folders and notes tucked away. They found old letters and small papers that matched what the police had seen in those years of painful reading. They found a log, a kind of private notebook with dates and small notes that mapped out the cruel actions. The notebook was kept hidden, a private place where the man had written things no one should write. That discovery, the hidden notebook and other papers, made the case no longer just a match of DNA and a link from a floppy disk. It showed a private record. It was an extreme event for the families because it turned fear into proof. It turned whispers into documents. The notebook held the names of victims and places. It showed how the man had kept his crimes close like a dark secret. The police photographed the notebook and bagged the papers. They treated them like precious and terrible evidence. Neighbors watched as officers carried boxes from the house. The church where Dennis had led bowed its head in shock. Families who had waited in silence for years now had real proof in the hands of the police. The town felt the weight of that discovery. People tried to understand how a person could live two lives at once, a volunteer and a villain. It was a hard thing to accept. We stop here. Chapter 1 ends on that sharp discovery. The arrest at the door and the hidden notebook were the loud events that changed everything. Next chapters will follow how the trial and the evidence helped families find answers, and how the town tried to heal after learning the truth. Tell me when you are ready for Chapter 2.